The old man stands at the teller window with his hands flat on the counter, and the young woman behind the glass will not look at him. Snow ticks against the front windows of the bank. His own money sits somewhere in that building. $8,000 he saved one folded bill at a time, and a printed slip on the counter says the request has been declined. Suspicious activity. The slip says he reads it twice. He has banked here for 51 years, and now a machine has decided he is a stranger to his own life. Wade Maddox watched all of it from the lobby bench, a cup of bad coffee going cold in his hand, and a German shepherd lying still at his boots. He had not come for trouble. He had come to deposit a check and to get out of the cold, and he would have left without a word if the dog had not lifted his head first. Bishop moved before Wade did. The shepherd rose off the floor without a sound, ears swinging forward, weight shifting onto his front paws. He was not looking at the old man. He was looking past him at the office door behind the teller line, at a man in a clean charcoal overcoat who had stepped half into the doorway and then stepped back. Wade had learned a long time ago to trust the dog's attention more than his own. When Bishop locked onto a thing, there was a reason, even if the reason took a week to surface. This is a story about loyalty, and about a quiet, wrong set right by patience instead of force. If that is the kind of story that stays with you, it is worth your while to see it all the way through. It earned its quiet the hard way. Wade set the coffee down. He was 41 years old. 11 of those years spent disarming things that wanted to kill the men around him. And the habit of reading a room had never left him. He read this one now. The old man, 90 if he was a day, stooped and dignified in a canvas coat gone soft at the elbows. The teller, maybe 25, embarrassed and frightened in equal measure, her eyes flicking again and again to that office door. And the man in the doorway watching the whole exchange the way a man watches a fire, he started to make sure it catches. The old man picked up his slip and his cane and turned for the door. He did not argue. That was the part that stayed in Wade's chest. A man with every right to shout had simply gathered his dignity, like a coat against the wind, and started for the exit, and somehow that was worse than shouting would have been. Wade stood. Bishop fell in at his left knee, exactly where the dog had walked for 6 years, close enough that Wade could feel the warmth of him through his trouser leg. They reached the door a step behind him, and Wade held it open against the wind. "Oh!" Wade said. The old man looked up at him, then down at the dog, and something in his face eased a fraction. Yours, he is. Good-looking animal." He studied Bishop with the unhurried attention of someone who had spent his life around working creatures. Shepherd knows his job. You can see it in how he stands. He does. Wade let the door close behind them. The two men stood under the bank's awning while the snow came down over the parking lot. "You all right? Looked like they gave you a hard time in there." The old man's jaw worked. For a moment, then the dignity cracked, just at the corner, and what came through underneath was bewilderment more than anger. 51 years, he said. "I have banked there 51 years. My wife and I opened that account the month we married. And today, a girl young enough to be my great-grandchild tells me I cannot have my own money because it looks suspicious." He shook his head slowly. "I am trying to pay for a roof. There is a leak over my back room. That is all it ever was. A roof." His name was Hollis Greer, and he told Wade that much before they parted, the way men of his generation will give you a name as a kind of receipt for kindness. He lived out past the marina. He said in the house he had built himself 60 years back, and he had been a ferry mechanic and a boat builder before his hands gave out. Wade gave his own name in return, and the dog's, and watched the old man make his careful way to a rust-spotted truck and pull out into the snow. That should have been the end of it. A stranger's bad afternoon witnessed and forgotten. Wade had his own quiet to keep. He had come back to Cedar Reach 4 months earlier to the lake town where he had grown up, because his mother's house had sat empty since her passing, and somebody had to decide what to do with it. He had not decided. He had simply moved in among her things and let the winter close around him, telling himself he was passing through. Bishop had stood up first, though, and that mattered. And that answer of the old man's, the plain wounded arithmetic of it, half a century of trust spent in a single afternoon, would not leave him alone for the rest of the day. He told himself he was only curious. 2 days later, he drove back to the bank to deposit his own check after all, and he made a point of being slow about it, of watching the lobby the way he had once watched a road for the wrong kind of stillness. The teller from before was at the second window. Her nameplate read, Marla. She was careful and quick with the customers, but every few minutes her eyes went to the same office door, and every time they did, her shoulders climbed a little toward her ears. The man in the charcoal overcoat had a name, too. It was printed in gold on a placard beside that office door. Preston Lyle, Branch Operations Manager. Through the half-open blinds, Wade could see him at his desk, on the phone, smiling at nothing the way men smile when they want the person across from them to feel at ease. He was somewhere near 50, smooth-faced, with the build of a man who had never done a day of physical work and had decided that was a kind of victory. Wade finished his deposit and left without asking a single question. On the way out, he paused at the community board by the door, the cork rectangle every small town bank keeps, and under the lost cat flyers and the church supper notice he found a single typed sheet. Notice of Estate and Elder Protection Services. A toll-free number, a small logo, a shield with a laurel around it. Lakeshore Fiduciary Trust. He read it twice. Something about it sat wrong. The way a clean uniform on a man who has never served sits wrong, and he could not have told you why. Bishop sniffed the bottom of the board, then sat and looked up at Wade, ears forward. Alert, patient, waiting to be told the thing he already seemed to know. Wade drove out to the marina that evening because he told himself he wanted to make sure Hollis got home safe, which was true, and because the wrongness of that typed sheet had followed him out the door, which was also true. He found the house easily enough. It stood at the end of a gravel lane where the land ran down to the water, a low, cedar-sided place with a workshop bigger than the house itself, and a dock that reached out into the gray skin of Marrow Lake. A single window glowed amber against the blue dusk. Hollis came to the door with a wrench still in his hand and a guarded look that softened when he saw the dog. He did not invite a stranger in so much as failed to send one away, and that was its own kind of welcome. The inside of the house was warm and close and smelled of wood smoke and machine oil. Photographs covered one wall. A young Hollis in a navy peacoat. A wedding, a woman with kind eyes through 40 years of pictures. And then no more pictures of her, only of a girl growing up, dark-haired and serious. "My granddaughter," Hollis said, following Wade's eyes. "Renata. She is overseas. Doctors Without Borders, somewhere I can barely pronounce. She calls when she can." He set the wrench down. "She's the only family I have got left. Her mother, my daughter, we lost 11 years ago. So there's the two of us now, even with an ocean in between." Wade let the silence sit. Bishop had crossed the room and settled himself against the old man's boots, uninvited, and Hollis looked down at the dog with a startled tenderness, as though he had forgotten what it felt like to be chosen by something. "You came about the bank," Hollis said finally. "I came to see you got home. The bank is your business. It is becoming everyone's business." Hollis lowered himself into a worn chair. "It is not the first time. 3 weeks ago, I went to move some money into my savings, and they told me the account was under review." "Review for what?" I asked. "Your protection," they said. The next week, a man called polite as Sunday. What to do? Said he was from a trust service the bank works with. Said because of my age, the state wanted to make sure nobody was, what was his word, exploiting me. He wanted me to sign some papers. Wanted to be appointed to handle my affairs for my own good. Hollis's hands tightened on the chair arms. I told him I have handled my own affairs since before his father was born. I hung up the phone. Wade had gone very still. "Did you sign anything?" "No." Hollis met his eyes. "But I will tell you what scares me, son, since you ask and since the dog seems to think you are worth telling. Last week, I went over my statements. I keep them in a folder. I have always kept paper. My wife taught me that. And there is money gone. Not much. Each time. $40, 60. 110 once, little bites going out to names I do not know. And every time I call to ask, they tell me it is a fee, a service charge, a protection assessment. Every time a different word." He looked at his own hands. "I built ferries that carried 10,000 souls a season and never lost one. I am not a confused old man, but they have decided to make me into one, and I cannot for the life of me figure out why. That hit Wade harder than he expected. Not the theft itself, the patience of it. The way it wore a smile and carried paperwork. He had spent a career around violence that announced itself, and here was a thing that did the opposite, that crept and apologized and called itself protection, while it ate a man alive $110 at a time. "I'm going to ask you for something," Wade said. "I want to see those statements, all of them, and the folder where you keep your paper. I used to be good at finding things that did not want to be found." Hollis studied him a long moment. Then he rose, went to a cabinet, and came back with a folder thick as a Bible, and he set it in Wade's hands like a man handing over the keys to his house. The next morning, Wade spread half a century of a life across his mother's kitchen table and began to read. Most of it was the ordinary archaeology of a long marriage. Deposits the size of a mechanic's honest wage paid in on Fridays for 40 years. A mortgage paid off in 1979 and never touched again. Withdrawals for a daughter's college, a granddaughter's plane tickets, a headstone in the spring of a year. Wade did not let himself dwell on. Hollis had written a note in the margin of nearly every page, a date, a reason, a name, in the small upright hand of someone who had been taught that money you do not account for is money you have already lost. Hollis had not been kidding about keeping paper. The man had built a paper bridge across half a century, and every plank of it held. Starting 8 months back, the pattern changed. The small bleeds Hollis had described were real, and they were not random. Wade pushed his mother's salt and pepper shakers aside and laid the statements end to end across the whole length of the table, 8 months of them in a row, and stood over them the way he had once stood over a stretch of road, looking not at any single thing but at the rhythm of the whole. There it was, a charge every 9 or 10 days. Never the same amount, never a round number, always small enough that a busy person would let it pass. $41.68, 110. He took a pencil and circled each one, And when he was done, the circles made a line down the months as steady as a pulse. Whoever was doing this had a schedule. Every charge that left the account went to one of 3 payees, and all 3 traced through a long, careful afternoon at the library computer with Bishop stretched under the desk against his shoe back to the same registered agent. Lakeshore Fiduciary, Trust, the Shield, and the Laurel, the same name as the typed sheet on the bank's community board. Wade wrote the 3 payee names on the back of an envelope, and then he wrote the registered agent under them, and he drew a single line connecting all 4. And he sat looking at that line for a long time. 3 doors. 1 room behind them, a fee here, an assessment there. And every time Hollis tried to take out a real sum, his own money, the account locked under review, and a polite voice suggested the answer was to let the trust take over. The withdrawals were not being denied because they were suspicious. They were being denied to manufacture a story that Hollis could not be trusted with his own affairs, so that someone could be appointed to handle them. Whoever ran that trust would then be handling a paid-off house on the water, a workshop full of tools, and a lifetime of careful saving. Wade sat with that a long time while the coffee went cold, and Bishop dozed in the square of weak sun on the floor. Then he made 2 phone calls, and the second one told him what he had already begun to fear. The state had no record of any Lakeshore Fiduciary Trust licensed to act as a fiduciary anywhere in the county. It existed on a typed sheet and a logo, and nowhere else that mattered. He could have gone to the sheriff that day. He thought about it. He had nothing yet that a tired deputy could act on, only a pattern and a suspicion and an old man's folder. A pattern was not proof. The manager, with the smooth smile, whoever he truly was behind it, had built this carefully enough to survive a tired deputy's afternoon. Wade had learned in another life that you do not pull on a wire until you know where it runs. So he decided to find out where the money went after it left Hollis Greer. He started by going back to the bank and doing the most ordinary thing imaginable. He opened a small account. He told the new accounts clerk he had just moved back to town, which was true, and that he liked to keep a little cash close, which was also true, and he filled out forms in a slow, deliberate hand and asked the kind of dull questions that make a clerk stop seeing you as a person. It worked. Within 20 minutes he was furniture, and furniture sees everything. He sat in the lobby for an hour over paperwork that did not need an hour, and he watched. He watched the manager come and go from that office 6 times in that hour, always with the same unhurried walk of a man who owns the floor he stands on. He watched which teller the man spoke to and which he did not. Lyle stopped at the first window to say something that made the young man there laugh. He did not stop at Marla's window. He never stopped at Marla's window. He simply passed behind her chair, and each time he passed, he let one hand rest on the back of it, just for a second, the way a man rests a hand on a thing he believes he owns. And each time Marla's shoulders climbed toward her ears, and her hands went still on the keys until he had moved on. Wade counted it the way he counted everything. 4 passes in 1 hour, 4 small flinches. A pattern is just a thing that happens more than once, and this was a pattern. Bishop watched too, in his way. The dog lay at Wade's feet with his chin on his paws and his eyes half closed, and to anyone glancing over, he was an old soldier's tired companion, dozing in the warmth. Twice, though, the dog's ears came up when Lyle crossed the lobby, swiveling to track him the whole length of the room. And once, Bishop rose halfway off the floor with a low breath in his chest and had to be settled with a hand on the shoulder and a quiet word. The dog did not like the man. Wade had stopped dismissing that kind of thing a long career ago. Bishop had alerted on worse than a banker, and Bishop had never once been wrong about which way danger sat. On the third afternoon, Wade was at the counter when a courier came in. A woman in a delivery jacket, a locked zippered pouch under her arm, the kind banks use to move documents and sometimes cash between branches. She did not go to a teller. She went straight back to that office, and the blinds came down, and 4 minutes later she came out with the pouch flatter than it had gone in. Wade watched her climb into a plain white van in the lot and pull away toward the Marina Road. He did not follow. Following a van tells you where it is going. Once, he wanted to know where it always went. So that night, he drove the Marina Road himself, slow with his headlights low, and at the storage units past the boat ramp, the long row of metal lockers where the summer people kept their jet skis through the winter, he saw the white van parked outside an open unit and a light on inside. Wade parked well back and walked the rest with Bishop off-leash at his heel. The dog moved like smoke through the cold. 40 feet from the open unit, Bishop stopped, stiffened, and his nose came up and locked. A low sound started in his chest. Not quite a growl, the sound he made when he had found the thing he had been brought to find. Inside the unit, under a hanging bulb, the courier was counting cash into banded stacks on a folding table, and beside her sat a metal cash box and a laptop and a stack of those same locked pouches. This was a back room where an old man's roof became somebody's stacks of 20s. Wade held very still in the cold and let himself see all of it before he moved the folding table. The banded stacks sorted by denomination, the way a person sorts money. They intend to keep separate from money they have to explain. The metal cash box, the laptop, its screen throwing a pale rectangle up onto the woman's face, and the stack of locked pouches, the same kind he had watched walk out of Lyle's office that afternoon. He committed the unit number to memory, the third from the end of the row, the padlock brand on the hasp, the plate on the white van. He did not take out his phone. A photograph taken by trespassing at night is a photograph a smooth man's lawyer makes disappear before breakfast. He had learned the difference in another life between knowing a thing and being able to prove it. And he had learned it the hard way, standing over evidence he could see and could not use. Wade put a hand on Bishop's shoulder, and they faded back into the dark before the woman ever knew the night had a witness in it. The dog moved at his hip without a sound, matching his pace through the frozen weeds, looking back once toward the lit unit, and then forward again, finished with the place. He had what he needed to be sure now. What he did not have was a single thing that would stand up anywhere it counted. And men like the one in the charcoal overcoat did not lose because you were sure. He learned the courier was Marla's cousin, which was how it usually went in a town this size. Everyone was somebody's cousin. The teller and the courier had grown up 3 houses apart. Wade did not go to Marla with accusations. He went to her on her lunch break at the diner counter, where she ate alone. And he set it down plainly, the way he had set down hard things for nervous men before. "You flinch when he walks behind you," Wade said. "I have watched you do it for a week. I think you know exactly what is happening to that old man. And I think it is eating you alive, and I think you are afraid of what happens to you if you say a word." He let that sit. "I am not the law. I am not anybody. I am just a man with a dog who watched them turn a 90-year-old away from his own money. You do not have to do anything. If you ever decided to, I would make sure it landed on him and not on you." Marla's hands shook around her coffee. The cup rattled once against the saucer before she steadied it. For a long moment she said nothing, and Wade thought he had misjudged her, that she would gather her purse and walk out, and that would be the end of the only witness he had. He let the silence stretch. He had learned that silence does more work than questions, that people will fill it if you give them room enough. Bishop lay against Wade's boot under the counter, and at some point Marla's free hand drifted down and rested on the dog's head, and the dog allowed it, and something in the woman loosened. Then she spoke, so quiet he had to lean in over the chipped formica. He told me it was elder protection, that it was a real program, that the state required it for customers over a certain age, that the bank had partnered with a trust to keep old people from being scammed. A short, broken sound that was almost a laugh. Scammed. The first month I believed it. He gave me a script to read on the phone. I read it to a sweet old woman on Cherry Street, and I thought I was helping her. Her eyes filled and did not spill. By the time I stopped believing it, he had me signing things too. The hold forms. Every account that goes under review, a teller has to initial the form. He always brought them to my window. Always mine. My initials are on every one of them. If it comes apart, I am the one whose name is on the paper. He made sure of that. He is not stupid. He is the opposite of stupid. There it was. Lyle had not been careless. He had built himself a shield out of a frightened girl's signature the way he had built a story out of an old man's age. He had foresight. Wade respected that the way you respect the depth of water you are about to wade into. Then we do not leave it to your word against his, Wade said. We find the thing he cannot explain away. The thing turned out to be hidden where no one had thought to look. And the reason no one had looked there became, in the end, the reason it survived. Wade had asked Hollis a question that seemed to come from nowhere. In all those years of paper, had Hollis ever kept anything important somewhere other than the house? Hollis had laughed, the first laugh Wade had heard from him. There was a watertight box, he said, that he had built into the false floor of the boat he was restoring in the workshop. A habit from his Navy days, a place for the things a man does not want a fire or a flood or a thief to take. His wife's rings were in it. And, he added, frowning, the little plastic stick the polite man from the trust had once mailed him, telling him to plug it into a computer and follow the instructions to enroll. Hollis did not own a computer. He had not trusted the thing, so he had put it in the box and forgotten it. Wade went very still, a thumb drive mailed by the trust, meant to be used, and then no doubt collected back or rendered useless. An old man with no computer had simply put it away in the one place on earth Preston Lyle would never think to search, the false floor of a half-built boat in a boat builder's shop. Lyle had reached for an old man's confusion as his weapon, and a lifetime of careful habits had quietly defeated it. They plugged it into the library computer the next morning, Wade and Hollis and the dog, lying across the old man's worn boots under the desk. It was an enrollment package, yes, full of authorization forms. Whoever had built it had been careless in the way careful men are sometimes careless about the tools they reuse. And the drive also held the working files that had been built from a spreadsheet. Names down the left side. 11 names. Account numbers. Monthly amounts. A column headed disbursements that led to the same 3 payees Wade had already traced. And across the top, in a header, no one had ever meant an outsider to read. The file's author saved automatically by the program that made it PL. 11 names. Hollis Greer was not the only old man in Cedar Reach who had been quietly turned into a confused stranger to his own life. He was the only one who had built a watertight box. Wade printed everything twice. He gave one copy to Marla to keep somewhere safe and far from the bank, and he kept the other. And then he did the thing he had been building toward all along. He did not kick down a door, he made an appointment. The board of Lakeside Heritage Bank met on the second Thursday of the month in a paneled room above the lobby, and a Marine in a clean shirt with a folder under his arm and a German shepherd at his knee was not what they expected when they opened the agenda to other business. The bank's president was there, a careful woman near retirement, 2 outside directors, and Preston Lyle invited because the matter concerned his branch, smiling that smile, certain he was about to watch a confused troublemaker embarrass himself. He was not a man to be ambushed without a counterattack, and he had prepared one. Before Wade could lay out a single page, Lyle spoke first, smooth and sorrowful. He had been expecting something like this, he said. Pained him. The truth, he told the board, was that Mr. Greer was a beloved figure in the community, but, regrettably, no longer competent to manage his own affairs. There had been incidents, confused withdrawals. A man preyed upon by a stranger, he said, with a glance at Wade, a drifter living in his late mother's house, who had wormed his way into a vulnerable old man's trust. He had, out of concern, already begun the paperwork for a competency petition. He slid a folder of his own across the table. He had even, he said gravely, documented Mr. Greer's recent erratic behavior himself. It was a good defense. It turned every fact on its head. The locked accounts became protection. The theft became a fee for that protection. And Wade became the predator. Half the room was nodding before Lyle finished. Hollis sat very straight in his chair, and his hands trembled, and for one bad moment Wade saw how easily an old man could be drowned by a smooth voice in a paneled room. Then Wade opened his own folder. He did not raise his voice. He had learned long ago that the quiet ones are the ones a room leans in to hear. He laid out the statements first. The 8 months of small bleeds, each to one of 3 payees. He laid out the document from the state, showing that the fiduciary trust held no license to act anywhere. A real trust must exist. He watched the president's face change as she understood that the service her own branch had been steering customers toward was a ghost, and then he laid down the printout from the thumb drive. 11 names, the disbursement column, and the header at the top of the file. P. Lyle, you mailed Mr. Greer the tool you built this with, Wade said. You counted on him being too confused to use it. He was not confused. He simply did not trust you, so he put it in a box. A man you called incompetent was careful enough to keep the one piece of evidence you needed destroyed. Wade slid the page closer to the president. Your branch did not protect 11 elderly customers. One man used your name to rob them, and made a frightened young teller sign the hold so her name would be on the paper if it ever came apart. It came apart. Her name is on the paper because he put it there, and so is yours, Mr. Brake. Lyle, on every file. Lyle's smile did not fall all at once. It went in stages, the way a structure fails. He reached for the competency petition again, his voice climbing now, telling the board this proved his point, that an old man could not possibly have orchestrated such a thing, that clearly the drifter had fabricated it. That was the moment Wade had waited for, because a fabricated file does not carry the author's name, saved into its header by his own software, and the president of the bank had already seen that it did. I have one more thing, Wade said, and then I will leave you to your business. He looked at Hollis. The old man rose, then slowly, with great dignity, and from his coat pocket he took a single sheet of paper. It was a letter he had written by hand the night before, in a clear and steady script, listing the dates, the amounts, and the names, every figure correct, a roof estimate clipped to the corner. "You wanted to argue this man does not have the mind to keep his own books," Wade said quietly. "He kept them better than your branch did. He caught you 8 months ago. It only took him this long to find someone who would listen." The room was silent, except for the radiator and the small sound of the dog shifting at Wade's knee. Bishop had watched Preston Lyle, the entire time ears forward, unblinking, and Lyle had not been able to stop glancing at him as though the animal saw straight through to the thing under the smile. It did not end with shouting or with handcuffs in that room. It ended, as these things do, with a careful woman near retirement saying she would be contacting the state banking regulator and the county prosecutor that afternoon and asking the manager to surrender his keys and his badge and to wait downstairs. Lyle gathered his folder of false documents with hands that had stopped being steady. At the door he turned, and for one moment the smile was entirely gone, and something colder looked out. There was nothing left to say that would not make it worse, and he knew it. And so he went down the stairs without a word. In the weeks after, the careful and unglamorous machinery of restitution turned. It did not turn fast. There were forms, and there were calls, and there were 2 visits from a tired-sounding investigator out of the state banking office, who took Wade's envelope of circled statements and his printout and looked at the auto-saved header on the file for a long time before he said quietly that he had been chasing the shadow of this for 2 counties and had never been able to put a name on it. Now he had a name. The frozen funds came back to Hollis, all of it, the $8,000 and the small bites both, traced down to the last $68 and returned. The other 10 names were found and made whole. Wade went to each door himself, the dog at his knee, because a letter from a bank had been the thing that frightened these people, and he did not want the good news to come wearing the same clothes as the bad. An old woman on Cherry Street, the one Marla had read the script to, made him sit down and eat a slice of pound cake before she would let him tell her why he had come. And when he told her, she put both hands over her mouth and wept into them, and Bishop leaned his whole weight against her shins until she could breathe again. A widower 2 streets over simply nodded once, like a man receiving an order, and then turned to the window so Wade would not see his face. 2 of the 11 had already signed their houses partway over before the thing was stopped. Those took longer, and they came back, too. Marla kept her job. The president herself put a note in the file that the teller had been coerced and had come forward, so that the woman's honesty stood on the record now instead of her fear. The courier, her cousin, told the prosecutor everything she knew about the storage unit and the pouches and the counting table in exchange for the chance to tell it before anyone made her. And Preston Lyle did not vanish the way such men sometimes do, the way these quiet predators so often dissolve into another town and another smile before anyone can put a name to the harm. The thumb drive with his name saved into its header followed him into a courtroom no smile could charm, and the system he had spent 8 patient months turning into a weapon against the old turned slowly and without mercy into the thing that held him. The part Wade carried with him was smaller than any of that. It was a Saturday in early spring, the lake still half-locked in gray ice, but loosening at the edges, the first open water showing black and bright near the dock. Wade had come out to the marina house to return the folder, the thick one, the years of a life that no longer needed defending. He found Hollis in the workshop with the half-built boat, the false floor open, the watertight box sitting on the bench beside his wife's rings, and the now useless thumb drive he had decided to keep, he said, the way a man keeps the shell of the thing that tried to sink him. Hollis had something for him. He led Wade out to the dock, the dog trotting ahead, and there at the end of it, fresh painted and gleaming, sat a small cedar skiff, the kind a man builds when his hands still want to make a useful thing. Across the stern, in careful hand-lettered paint, was a single word. Not a name Wade expected, a dog's name. Bishop. A boat should be named for whoever stood first watch, Hollis said. And he stood up before any of you did. Hollis's voice was rough. I built ferries my whole life that carried strangers safe across deep water. I never thought I would need carrying myself. You did that. You and the dog. He looked out at the loosening ice. My granddaughter is coming home in June. I want her to meet the man who stayed. You are not passing through anymore, son. I can tell. The lake gets in a person. It has got in you. Wade did not answer for a while. Bishop had walked out to the very end of the dock and stood there in the cold, bright air, ears up, looking at the open black water as though something in it had finally settled. And Wade understood that the old man was right, that he had stopped passing through some weeks ago without ever deciding to, that his mother's house had quietly become his own, the way the lake had quietly become his own, one cold morning at a time. If you have ever wondered whether the small things you do for a stranger matter, whether standing up when a quiet wrong is done in front of you changes anything at all, hold on to this. A dog rose first in a cold bank lobby. A man followed. Someone who had been told he was nothing held on to his careful habits and his dignity until a person came who would listen. And a roof got fixed, and 11 kitchens kept their warmth, and a man who thought he had nothing left to protect found out he was wrong. Goodness does not always arrive loud. Sometimes it arrives on 4 quiet paws. May it find you. May it stand up when you cannot. And may you always have someone who will follow. The ice went out of Merrill Lake the 2nd week of June. The same week, Renata came home. Wade stood on the dock with Hollis and the dog and watched a granddaughter run the length of it into her grandfather's arms. And he felt the old, familiar tightness behind his ribs draw close, and then, for once, ease and let go. Bishop pressed warm against his leg. The water was open all the way across now, bright to the far shore. He was not going anywhere. He was already where he belonged.